we must understand that we are a people of immense power. And there's absolutely nothing that can stop the power that we represent. When Donald Trump talked about shithole, maybe he was looking at the gold in Africa and thought it was shit. Maybe he was looking at the over 97 billion barrels of crude oil in Angola and he thought it was shit. Maybe he was looking at the cashew in Mozambique and thought it was shit. Maybe he saw the rubber in Liberia and thought it was shit. The fact of the matter is we must begin to recognize our power as a people.
On Saturday, March 3rd at 1 p.m. at Brooklyn's Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, there will be a tribunal on the ethnic cleansing of the black community. You say it cannot be? Look around, brothers and sisters. Hidden behind passive and nonviolent terms like gentrification, we're being disappeared. There were no empty apartments, houses, or businesses in our community. They were filled with us, with no intention of leaving. Yet every day there's another empty building being renovated and community businesses now gated with for rent signs hanging. Where have yesterday's people gone? From New York to LA, from Detroit to DC, from Philly to Boston, our communities are being systematically destroyed by bankers, government policies, criminal landlords, and predatory real estate brokers. Deteriorating public housing is no longer a priority, but begins to more mirror prisons with no way out. But not simply our housing. The mass incarceration of our youth is destroying our communities while saving dying white communities upstate. The destruction of public education in community schools condemn our people to miseducation. The attack on our human right to preserve and develop our culture tears at the very fabric of our community. And too expensive or non-existent health care condemns our families and particularly our elders to accelerated death. We must connect the dots of our oppression. We must make the case that the sum total of these attacks against black people is straight up ethnic cleansing, which is an international crime against humanity. The tribunal, with a panel of judges and expert in community testimony, sets out to establish the facts of our condition, to change the conversation outside the definition and words our enemy wants us to disarm us with. Come out and join us, because we ain't going nowhere.
We ain't going nowhere.
Hey brothers, where y'all going?
We ain't going nowhere. Gentrification ain't nothing but ethnic cleansing. Matter of fact, we see you March 3rd.
You just saw Saturday, March 3rd, all roads lead to Brooklyn for the We Ain't Going Nowhere Tribunal of the People. The theme of We Ain't Going Nowhere is that we understand that the black community in New York City, in Brooklyn, across the United States is under attack. It's the very gentle name they use for it is gentrification, which seems like, you know, doesn't seem so bad. It's like the economic forces determine what's going on. But our position is that gentrification is in fact ethnic cleansing, and ethnic cleansing is a crime. It's a crime, it's one of the components of genocide, and it's what's happening in our community. So that if we don't understand things, if we don't classify them correctly, we'll be addressing a problem from the wrong perspective. And one of the things, particularly in this month of Black History, the day before we commemorate the anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, Malcolm X taught us that we have to say things, we have to make things plain, we have to say them as they are, we have to call them out for what they are. So we're saying that what's going on in our community is not gentrification, it's ethnic cleansing, and it takes many forms. It takes the form clearly of housing, in terms of us being forced out of housing and moved from, in Brooklyn, from one side of Atlantic Avenue out to the Atlantic Ocean. In education, in terms of the miseducation of our children, in healthcare, in terms of what's happening in our hospitals, in every aspect of our lives, we are under attack, and as well as our culture, which is what has been our lifeblood. So this March 3rd, a week from Saturday, we are holding a tribunal. It's a people's tribunal on the attack on the black community, on ethnic cleansing in 2018. We invite all of you to come, all who are viewing this, to come, to bring your friends. The format of the tribunal is we have a panel of judges, some very distinguished jurists. Victor Good, who is a professor at CUNY Law School and has been an activist as well as an attorney for many years. King Downing, who is an attorney really based in Jersey, but is also the head of the Mass Defense Committee of the National Lawyers Guild and has been involved in activities around the country. And as a matter of fact, one of the things he did after Katrina, he held a tribunal, a people's tribunal, in terms of what had happened in Katrina, particularly with the killing of people who were trying to leave New Orleans to get to a place of safety and were turned back and killed by civilians and the police. And Joan Gibbs, another lifelong activist and attorney, did a lot of work around the grand jury, was the lead counsel for the Medgar Evers Center for Law and Social Justice, will be the panelists. And we will have presentations at the tribunal around these different areas and the different forms that the gentrification takes. Some people may simply think of gentrification and ethnic cleansing as the housing issue. That's one of the sharpest issues, but it's not the only issue. One of the things we're going to look at is what happened in Detroit, the bankruptcy of Detroit, and how it could have been avoided, how what happened later with the water in Flint and Detroit could have been avoided, how that was part of a systemic plan to depopulate the Detroit area and change the racial content of its area. We're going to look at Katrina. We're going to look at so-called natural disasters, which in fact were man-made disasters, which led to the depopulation of the black population of New Orleans, which was once 75% black and is now down to under 50% and now has a white mayor after many years of having a mayor who represented the majority of the population. We're going to look at Brooklyn, which just over the last 15 years has had a decrease in its black population in Bedford-Stuyvesant, do-or-die Bed-Stuy, from 75% black to nearly under 50% black. We're going to look at the history that this is not a new phenomenon, that black people at different points in time have been pushed out of the communities that we lived in whenever white folks decided they no longer wanted us to live there and that they wanted that property. So we're going to look at it historically in terms of not only Tulsa and Rosewood, but some other parts of the country that people may not be familiar with. And we're going to be putting that all in the context of this human rights violation, this crime, ethnic cleansing, with the objective of educating our community to what's going on, understanding clearly what's going on so that we'll be able to organize to fight it, of putting together a complaint to take to the United Nations to bring international attention to what's going on. One of the important things is, once again, in Black History Month and every month, that Malcolm raised was the necessity of us putting our struggle on the in the international arena, on the agenda of the United Nations, to draw attention to it, because in any struggle, the more attention you bring to it, the more allies you develop around it, the pressure which international attention brings to your struggle helps in terms of pushing your struggle forward. So this is what we're going to be doing on March 3rd. We invite people to come, any people who are interested in attending the in attending the tribunal. And if there's testimony you'd like to submit, you have to let us know ahead of time and submit it. You can call us at 718-398-1766. That's 718-398-1766. Or you can reach us on Facebook and Twitter at We Ain't Going Nowhere -Tribunal. And so we encourage people to come. We encourage people to submit testimony. We want to make this a community-centered, community-oriented piece. And this is going to be the first, because what we want to do is have a national tribunal as well. But this is very important, the one we're doing on March 3rd, because it is New York. And New York, a lot of times, is the lead in terms of what's going on in different parts of the country. So we We encourage you to come. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And I just want to let you know that you are watching 30 frames a second.
Greetings, sisters and brothers. Thank you all for coming. We are proud Africans. We are proud Africans. Demonization. Demonization has always gone hand in hand with exploitation, colonization, and even genocide of Africans, correct? Donald Trump knows that Africa is not a collection of shithole countries. How do I know that? Because in September, when he met with African presidents at the United Nations, what did he say? He said, my rich friends are making money in Africa. So he knows that Africa is collectively the richest collection of countries or continent in the world. Is that not correct? So when he's demonizing Africans, he's doing something that has historically always been the case. You demonize a people when you want to exploit them, when you want to abuse them. Is that not correct? Today, Africa continues to sustain and build the wealth that we see in the United States and in Europe. How is that? Africa provides the raw resources that fuel the companies, and yes, the sister is right, for Asia as well. Africa builds the factories in the United States, in Europe, and in China today. If it was not for Africa's wealth, we would not see all these buildings we see here today. We would not see that building, Trump World Tower today. African wealth, the wealth of enslaved Africans built the United States. It built the economic foundation that allowed industrialization. While they were building it on the plantations, they were referred to as savages, right? And yet they were building the wealth in the United States. Thomas Jefferson, a founding father of the Republic, wrote in Notes on the State of Virginia that Africans are inferior compared to whites. Yet at the same time, he was fathering children with African women. Is that not correct? Demonization in Haiti. Haitians abused, enduring the worst torture in the world. Enslaved Africans in Haiti, they used to pack dynamite into their anus and then light it up. And yet the Haitians were the ones referred to as savages. The French who were committing these acts of barbarity were the ones who were supposedly civilized. It did not stop Haitians from fighting and defeating Napoleon's mighty army, the Haitian Revolution of 1804. Let's salute brothers and sisters from Haiti. Demonization in Africa. Demonization was used to colonize Africa. The Europeans claimed they were in Africa to civilize Africans, right? How do you civilize when you're killing 10 million people in the Congo? How do you civilize when you're exterminating the Herero in what is today Namibia, at the same time extracting the riches from Africa? What kind of civilization is that? That was just used to rationalize the exploitation of Africa. It was called the white man's burden. No, it was Africa's burden to build the world. Joseph Conrad wrote Heart of Darkness. Africa is described up to date in the 21st century as the dark continent. Joseph Conrad's book is read by millions of students all over the world. Heart of Darkness. We all know that book, right? Chinua Achebe said Joseph Conrad was a thoroughgoing racist. I agree with brother Chinua Achebe. What do we need to do from here, sisters and brothers? We need to go to the final P in the series of P's. P for protest, P for policy, P for power. It means we really have to rekindle the spirit of Pan-Africanism that helped to liberate Africa. It was Marcus Garvey who inspired Kwame Nkrumah. It was people like W.E.B. Du Bois that inspired us, C.L.R. James, Walter Rodney, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, brothers from here, inspiring brothers and sisters in Africa. Michael Manley. The list is endless, and you have to excuse me, and I apologize if I forget any. I just don't have enough time to list all the great Pan-Africans. But the message is this: we have to broaden and deepen our alliances. If we speak collectively, we can help end the abuse of Africans here in Haiti and on the continent. So if we take one message from here today, it is Pan-African unity. Let's all come together and build, as we build a bigger alliance for the bigger march, which is going to be in Washington, D.C. on May 25th, African Liberation Day, when we take it to Donald Trump's doorsteps. Thank you, sisters and brothers. Long live Africa. One Africa united.
For those 1 or 2 people on the planet who do not know, this is 30 Frames a Second, and I'm Nat Wood. You had the privilege of listening to Roger Wareham talk about an event that's coming up in Brooklyn. It's ethnic cleansing, is that correct?
Right. It's the attack on the black community is ethnic cleansing in 2018, yes. And what I did neglect to mention was, I think,
by the way, this is Roger Wareham, and it's Black History Month, so we got the December 12th movement, euphemistically referred to as D12, who thinks the December 12th movement is a bit harsh.
Why? Because December is in the winter?
No, because it's y'all.
But the program on March 3rd, the tribunal on March 3rd, is going to be at Bed-Stuy Restoration, which is at 1360 Fulton Street in the People's Republic of Brooklyn. It begins at 1 o'clock, and as I said, we encourage people to come, let people know about it. It's an opportunity, it's a historic opportunity for people to participate in and contribute to another part of our development in terms of both the local, the national, and the international aspects of our struggle, like the Pan-Africanism that Milton was talking about, because the attack on black people in this country is reflected in different parts of the world, that we're under siege for different reasons, but we're definitely under siege. And on the continent, it's for control of resources. Here in the United States, we're in a bind because we were brought here for economic reasons. We certainly weren't brought here for any social reasons. We were brought here for economic reasons. We were brought here to make a profit for slaveholders, for the rulers of the country. And that's been the necessity for our continued presence, has been, we've been a source of creating wealth for anybody except us. And now, given the nature of this society, given the nature of capitalism in 2018, they no longer need us because the United States doesn't manufacture anything anymore. I mean, in any real sense. Most of what this society has become is a consumer society. People are buying things that are created elsewhere, and therefore, the only purpose we have is to buy things. But the problem is they don't have any work for us to do, and so the only realm in the United States economy where we make money is in the prisons, where, you know, people remember the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery did not include when you're in the prison system. Slavery is legal. So you find brothers and sisters in prisons doing jobs with major companies and doing work for them that when they are released, they can't get a job for. But it's a profit-making vehicle. For those of us on the outside, they don't know what to do with this. And so this whole process of attack, what is in effect a genocide, which doesn't necessarily mean they're going to line everybody against the wall or put them in gas chambers, but it's your disenfranchisement, your removal from your roots. People talk about the housing crisis and people being moved in Bed-Stuy, which is where I live now. I mean, I grew up in Harlem, and Bed-Stuy.
That explains it.
Yeah, Bed-Stuy, up until the last 8 or 9 years, was in a lot of ways the way Harlem was when I was growing up, in terms of just the energy, the political consciousness, the culture, the spirit. It was like alive. And then we began to see this gradual, and actually it's not a gradual change in terms of influx of other folks, of white folks and black folks moving out. And the question is, well, where did people go? Because it wasn't like there was a lot of vacant housing. People were being moved out of their housing, which is what ethnic cleansing talks about. It's a removal. It's like a forced removal of one group to create homogeneity of another group, and that's what's happening in Bed-Stuy. So I know people who come back to Bed-Stuy after they haven't been here for years are like, whoa.
Brooklyn is the next big thing.
It's similar to what's happening in Harlem, you know, and at the tribunal, Nellie Bailey, who is a longtime Harlem housing activist, is going to be talking about what that transition looks like in Harlem as well, you know. Kevin Richardson, one of the Central Park Five, I'm waiting for his confirmation, but he said he thinks he's going to be able to come and just talk about what that experience meant in terms of being removed from the community and how it's a microcosm of what's happening to our folks who get removed, incarcerated, sent upstate, and particularly if they live in public housing, when they come back, they can't go back to the housing that they grew up in. And so there's an all-out assault. And what we want to try and do is what we call it connect the dots. We want to connect the dots between what's happening with housing, what's happening in education, what's happening with health care, and so that people don't look at them as separate problems that we face, but as a systemic problem that we face. And once we begin to grasp that, we then can begin to talk about, well, how do we deal with it? Because it's not a hopeless situation, but in order to attack the situation, first you have to understand the scope of it, and you have to call it what it is, which is why we don't use the term gentrification. We call it ethnic cleansing because it brings it down real clear and up front to folks around. We're dealing with a human rights violation. And what I bring to the viewers' attention is, after Katrina, or maybe a few years after Katrina, Jelani Cobb, who's a professor at Columbia, wrote a piece about the storm. And one of the statements he made was that Katrina is the first in a series of events that call into question the citizenship, black citizenship in the United States. Because if you remember, Bush called black folks who were they're refugees. And refugees are people who come from one place, another country,
seeking refuge.
Right. And what black folks, if we were citizens, he wouldn't be calling us refugees. But
also, we didn't come here seeking refuge.
No. But
we had refuge.
Yeah, well, if you're a citizen and you're forced to move from one place, one part of the country to another for whatever reason, that's what's called internal displacement, because you're part of that. A refugee is someone who comes from another country to your country. So in his mind, and in the mind of most white folks, I would say, is that we have the title of citizen, but we don't really have the content of citizenship.
Right.
You know, when you know, we've been going to the United Nations Human Rights Commission since almost 30 years now, since 1989. And we used to tell people there, and this was before there was the internet, and there was just a lot of, the only information that people were getting about the situation of black people was what was presented by the mainstream media, which was that, dang, boy, those folks play ball, they get millions of dollars, and Oprah Winfrey has a show, and you know, and Bill Cosby is the model father. And we would say, no. That may be true for a very small percentage, but for the majority, the massive black people, our conditions are akin to those of a developing country surrounded by a developed country. And so that's what we would take to people. And so now what we want to bring to people is that things have not fundamentally changed, that we are no longer on the agenda of the United States, the Obama presidency notwithstanding, and that they're trying to find a way to deal with us, and that we're under attack in every which way possible, and that we're suffering human rights violations, we're suffering in essence, what are crimes against humanity, and we want to bring that to everybody's attention. We want to organize people around it. So that's what we're going to be doing on March 3rd, and then, past that. One other thing I'd like to bring up to your listening audience, viewing audience, is that tomorrow, the 21st, is the 53rd year since Malcolm was assassinated. And we always do, December 12th, we always does something on Malcolm's assassination. So this year, tomorrow at 5 p.m., we're going to meet on the corner where the state office building is, 125th Street and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. We're going to have a rally there in the street, and then we're going to go down to Malcolm X Boulevard, straight down 116th Street, back up to Adam Clayton Powell, and down St. Nicholas to All Souls Episcopal Church, which is right there on 88 St. Nicholas Avenue, 114th and St. Nick. We're going to go there. We're going to have a program that starts at 6:30. So we encourage people to come to that too. It's also looking at the question of ethnic cleansing. We're going to be showing a video of Malcolm, of the importance of putting our situation in the human rights agenda, and what that means for us in 2018.
There's a few things going on, because you mentioned Brooklyn. And you mentioned housing. Recently in Brooklyn, because we dealt with this almost exact same issue in the exact same age group with Florence Rice. Florence M. Rice had a situation where they were trying to evict her. And the difference between Florence Rice, because they were literally almost the same age. Florence Rice was about 86 when this happened, and the woman in Brooklyn was, I think, 86.
Oh, right, over in
right. She left. They had been trying to evict her because she had been there for a while, and she went on a vacation. Her rent was paid. Her rent was paid. This was not an eviction due to non-payment of rent, which is understandable if you're black in America, especially black in New York, but that wasn't the case. They found a way to evict her in absentia because she was not around, she was on vacation. When she came back, she found out that she was evicted from her home, not for non-payment of rent. I'm not even sure what they did, but they did something, because the real estate market controls politics in the in New York, and in the United States, but especially in New York, the richest city in the United States of America. They evicted her. Now, the difference between her and Florence Rice is that Florence Rice had all of us. Right. And we all rallied around Florence Rice. And Florence Rice ended up staying in that apartment at a very reduced rent until she was almost 100 years old, before her daughter decided to take her and look after her. The 86-year-old woman in Brooklyn was evicted, and she subsequently died from the stress of that eviction. So when we talk about ethnic cleansing, we're talking about a case where lives, actual lives, are in the balance. That is not just a case of young males who can go live at their old lady's house. We're talking about women. During the Florence Rice case and a few other cases we've been involved in, I've had the misfortune of spending some time in tenant court. And I can tell you that for the most part, it's women and children in there. You know, women with babies, old women, old people. They're getting evicted en masse, and there's no cameras in there. There's no MNN, which was BCAT, Bronx Net. Gil Noble is no longer alive. Inez Barron is in the council, but they don't have a Charles Barron getting on their nerves like they did. And as a result, 10, 12 years later, we have the exact same scenario, an entirely different result. So, and that's just one instance. I didn't even go into all the people in Chinatown who got thrown out because they said the staircase was messed up, and most of them are never getting back to their community. So speak to the human issue of what we're up against and how do we respond day to day, especially when our grandparents and our children and grandchildren are so heavily involved in this.
Yeah, it's all about the human element, and I think, you know, the Florence Rice case is exemplary of the way to combat it is the people be organized. Because I remember the woman, the 86-year-old woman, there was demonstrations and stuff for a while, and she said she was not leaving her house.
Right.
And eventually she decided, she worked out some kind of agreement with them where she eventually had to leave, but for a long time, they couldn't get her out of there.
Right. And
that's why the tribunal is important in the Malcolm program tomorrow, because we've got to learn that that's a community response, a communal response is the only way that we can push back. You know, you can't do it individually. I know in the work we've been doing in Brooklyn that, you know, out in the streets, and folks are saying people are losing their houses, but they're not talking with each other.
Right.
Because they're not talking with their neighbors to let them know this is the problem. You know, that people may be embarrassed or whatever, it may be taxes, whatever, but the bottom line is they're gone. They're gone without even an opportunity for a block association or somebody to pool money to try and deal with it, but to deal with it communally. That's one of the things that we imbibe from U.S. ideology, is this view of individualism, that this is just my problem, as opposed to it's a community problem and it's a systemic problem. It's not a personal fault. And if people too often look at things like, oh, I failed. If I can't do it, I failed. Whereas you need to understand that it's designed for you to fail.
Right.
It's set up for you to fail, but for you to not see it, that it's a systemic attack on you. It's like a personal attack. And so those are one of the things we want to get across to people, that if we don't understand the nature of the attack we're in, we're all going to be going shortly, except for a very few rich individuals who they'll let Bob at the top to give a false impression that things are okay. And there's an urgency to it that if you rely on the mainstream or the corporate media, if you're not watching this program, that you won't get in terms of what's happening. And it's also the very insular, like, well, this is just happening to me. Right. And you look around, there's a whole bunch of yous on, you know, the other side of the tracks.
Right. And a lot of people, to piggyback on what you're saying, a lot of people will not realize how powerful that coalition of people who rallied around Ms. Rice were, how much it actually took to keep an 86-year-old woman in her house. It took first my partner David X going there and videotaping the horrific conditions, and then it took us showing these conditions on MNN, being picked up by the community. Community people were calling in saying, set it off, Nat. Other people saw this. We were able to take it up to MNN, Melissa, who was running programming at the time, put it in heavy rotation, so they showed that show over and over and over again. Ozzie Thompson, who was a community cop, he put it on his show. So they were showing it all day, all the time at MNN. When word got out at David Jenkins was running BronxNet at the time, he got out because he was one of the guys who told me I had to take care of Miss Rice, otherwise I'd never get a show there as long as I lived. When he got word of it, he put it in heavy rotation in the Bronx. I had producer friends in Brooklyn who gave up their time slots to run it over and over again. The Amsterdam News picked up on it. Gil Noble, who was doing Like It Is, featured it on Like It Is, so it was running the Amsterdam News. Even Arnold Diaz, who was working for Fox at the time, ran it on his show and talked about it. So it was literally everybody and everything, and the people came out en masse to every event. Charles Barron, we had a rally on the steps of City Hall, and Mayor Bloomberg was coming in at the time. And he was surrounded by 2 giant black bodyguards, and he was on his way up, and Barron roped him into taking a photo op with Miss Rice, you know, so he had to kiss Miss Rice on the cheek, you know. But this is the kind of coalescing of community organizations around a person. It took all of this and more, everything I'm describing and more, to fight off these powerful lawyers, and we're talking about Pinnacle. We're not talking about like just some slumlord who's you know. It was Pinnacle, and Pinnacle not only ended up bending the knee, but they ended up giving her money at her birthday party and taking pictures with her, you know. But that's how far it had to be taken before we could actually stop this attack on an elder.
Right,
you know.
and those attacks are happening every day in all parts of the city.
Right.
And it's a crime in itself that you have to mobilize that much to get a decent living for an 86-year-old black woman who's devoted her life to the struggle. I mean, that's, you know, it's the immorality of the society, the immorality of capitalism, because it's almost an oxymoron to talk about morality and capitalism in the same sentence, because there's no morality to a system that solely exists for profit. But, you know, the other day in the Congress when they allowed the children's health insurance program to expire. So what society, what so-called civilization will take out anything on their children, let their own children go without health care? So I think that's what we're dealing with.
And that's how they blackmailed the Democrats into signing the tax package in the first place. They said, if y'all don't go with us on the tax package, forget about DACA. If you don't go with us, we're gonna kill health care for children. And they found a way to. You know,
the Democrats should have called them up. The Republicans know that the Democrats have the backbone of a jellyfish.
That's right. That's exactly it.
And they're all part of the same. They're all part of the same game.
Right.
You know, it's like the Democrats are now like the left wing of the Republican Party, the left wing of the ultra right wing, and so we've got to be clear around that. So then we don't invest our hopes in, well, once Trump is passed, we'll get a Democratic president who will, in essence, is going to end up doing the same thing, but do it softer and maybe at slower speed. You know, this really is getting an idea of what's the nature of the problem we face, and particularly for black folks, how do we need to move forward? You know, one of the things we've talked about over the years is that, and I was just reading this, I think it was in this article that Jelani Cobb did about Black Panther, but it was that black people, and he continues to raise the theme of citizenship, black citizenship, is that we've never been asked, what do we want our relationship to be to the United States? We were brought over here. We didn't have any say-so in that. We were brought over in chains. We were forced to work. We were enslaved. After the Civil War, we were given citizenship. You know, we weren't asked whether we want to stay here, whether we want to have a separate spot, whether we want to go back to Africa. We've never had, in essence, any sort of plebiscite or referendum around what do we want. And the citizenship we got, it was always been a flawed citizenship, because there's no such thing as second-class citizenship. You're either a citizen or you're not. So I was saying before, when we used to make the presentations at the United Nations, I would tell people, I carry a U.S. passport, but I have no illusion that I'm a U.S. citizen. The passport gets me to go over there, but I don't have the rights of a citizen. Because if I had the rights of a citizen, they wouldn't have to pass separate congressional acts to grant me the same rights as any white person who walks off the boat. And so all the things that are happening should be raising in our mind, you know, what we have a right to a plebiscite. We have a right to determine what is it we want to. How do we want our relationship to be the United States? Do we just want to stay here and deal with this? Do we want to go to an area down south that we have historically a right to? Do we want to repatriate to the continent of Africa? That's part of the discussion that needs to be going on as the offshoot of this question of ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I mean, I don't know how more we can convey the urgency of it. You know, people, we get mad, we get upset, we get angry when the police kill somebody. When they did this repeat the other day with a cop who killed Danner. I said, this is 1986. This is Eleanor Bumper's repeat. Somebody with a mental problem.
I don't know if she had a mental problem. She was in her house.
Right. Well, allegedly, they said she had a mental. Somebody said she had a mental problem.
If she had a mental problem, I don't know if that is illogical to say you can't come in my house.
You can't come in my house, which is why this was like a repeat of Eleanor Bumpers in '85, where they forced her way in the house. That she had a problem in terms of being behind in rent. A team that was supposedly equipped to deal with folks who were emotionally disturbed came in. They had all sorts of equipment. They had a bar, a Y bar, it's like 6 to 12 feet long, to be able to keep somebody at bay. They had mace or whatever, or taser, whatever it was at that point in time, and they resolved it by saying that this 64, 65-year-old woman was going to attack them with a kitchen knife, and they shot her with a shotgun. Shot her with a shotgun, blew off most of her fingers, but she was still holding the knife. So they shot her a second time. She had a little bit of the blade of the knife in with whatever was left in her hand. And then she died, not from the gunshot wound, but she bled out because when the EMS came, she was a very heavy woman. The cops would not help the EMS get her into the elevator, and so the delay in getting her into the elevator to get in the hospital, she had bled out by the time she got to the hospital. And I think the EMS had said if she had gotten to the hospital earlier, they might have saved her. And so following Luis Baez in 77, 78, who was another emotionally disturbed person who the police, the mother had called because he was cutting up the linoleum with a scissors that that the kids have, those rounded scissors. And when the police came in, he jumped out the window. He was on the first floor of the projects. And they went out and they shot him like 18 times. And so every time this happened, he said, well, we've got
Even recently with Mrs. Ba, she called the police because of her son. But she didn't actually call the police. She called the ambulance, And the response ended up in the young man.
Because our lives mean nothing, and the response of the system is, well, we need to train the police better, but the people who've been going there are the ones that are supposed to be trained. To not open
fire on
because
grandma?
all they had to do was close the door,
I'm not trained.
And
wait. I can guarantee you, I wouldn't have killed grandma. I'd have backed up off of grandma. I'd have sideswept. If she had swung, I might have taken one here, but I'm not going to kill grandma, especially a little old grandma. That's not going to happen. So that's beyond sensitivity training. There's something wrong with your humanity that you would even come like this in the first place. There's something wrong with you.
Because they don't see us as human beings. I mean, that was the genesis of the ideology of racism. We're Christian, Christians can't enslave people. So it must mean that they're not human beings. And so you develop a whole ideology to say that these people are subhuman, and it carries over, and it's carried over, and it's gotten embellished, and it gets carried out, and it becomes, and everything, and then the media perpetuates it. So in the minds of the police and of most white folks is that, but they're a little less than human. The Alameda is reading Thomas Jefferson around, they're inferior, and that's what gets ingrained. And so.
And they also give themselves a cop-out, as Alameda said. This is the white man's birth. I don't want to do this, but somebody has to do it because
we're doing a favor.
The world needs me to be stern so that it can survive. This is my. Do you think I really want to do this? I mean, this is hard, but someone has to make these hard decisions.
And so you're just over why we were brought here, the wealth that we've created, the genius we've shown in terms of just pushing forward the technology of people who are working in the fields and different things, develop the technology to make that burden easier.
Right.
We don't get credit for that. And so
Right.
that's why, you know, in 2018, we've got to remove the scales from our eyes. We've got to understand, not just rhetorically, that our community's under attack. We've got to take up the responsibility and the organizing to do that, you know, for ourselves, for our children, for our elders. And that's why, you know, it's very important that people come out to these two programs that we're having tomorrow night at All Souls at 114th and St. Nicholas, and on March 3rd, the Tribunal. And I gave the contact information and numbers so that if people have some testimony that they want to submit, they call us and make contact, and we'll see, you know, how we deal with that. We have people some experts who are going to testify around some of those different areas, you know, that we talked about, you know, particularly the Detroit one and the Katrina piece is just instructive. There was a book by Naomi Klein called Disaster Capitalism, where she talks about how capitalism takes advantage of so-called natural disasters to push forward their agenda. And the agenda now is that white folks need to be back in the central cities,
right,
in the areas that black folks occupy.
Right,
so the flooding of New Orleans and the breakdown of the dams, which many people maintain was not an accident. It was either intentional or predictable, led to. And one point I remember people made is that they tore down, I forget the projects, it might have been Cabrini. No, that's in Chicago. They tore down the projects in New Orleans, which were on the high ground, which hadn't been affected. But they used the Katrina as an excuse now to remove that and put in this place high-priced condos, because that's what the move is. So, you know, here we are 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, still talking about the same things that Malcolm was talking about, that Du Bois was talking about, that Patterson took to the United Nations in the 1950s when we charged genocide.
And not to cut you off, but I just want to say, and it's accurate, but I don't like to use the word capitalism simply because it allows X number of white people to take it's the corporation's mantra, this progressive mantra, and avoid the greatest subject of white supremacy and white domination. Because no matter whether or not you are correct or accurate in your assessment of capitalism, in point of fact, white folks globally, not just within the confines of the black community, but the whole world bends the knee to white supremacy. Asia has a white supremacist fixation. The white children are better than the off-whites. And literally, anyone who can skate by with a modicum of white look in their face, you know, the absence of melanin, benefits from that state. And we have to address white supremacy, because the progressive movement can be just as authoritarian, just as white supremacist in who they choose for their leaders and what they want the agenda to be and who they want to lead the agenda. You know, it is not uncommon to see a table full of white folks talking about their progressives discussing whether or not we deserve reparations. And this has to be addressed.
No, I mean, I hear your point. I say capitalism because that's the system we deal with.
Right.
But particularly, you cannot
that.
separate the history of capitalism from the history of white supremacy.
Right.
And in this country, enslavement, around the world, well, throughout the Americas, enslavement and colonization. Because if you remember, they used to say the sun never set on the British Empire.
Right.
That they had colonies all around the globe, and the way they were able, this little tiny island with a minuscule population and terrible weather and no natural resources, was able to do that because what does Stephen Biko say? The greatest weapon in the hands of the enemy is the mind of the oppressed. In the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And that's what white supremacy has done. It's created a mindset that says that I don't have to be here, but I got your mind. I got your mind trained. And so clearly that we have to address. We never separate that in terms of our struggle, and in terms of, in particular, that black folks have got to look out for black folks. That if we don't understand that our responsibility is to look out for black folks, some folks want to jump to alliances before we've consolidated ourselves. And you have to have alliances, but the alliance has got to be based on, we're clear about our agenda. We've consolidated ourselves. And so I think that's why, you know, we always bring up Malcolm. We're Pan-Africanists because we understand that our struggle is an international one. But right here in New York, we've got to pull ourselves together. Part of the work we were doing around ethnic cleansing was back in October. It was on Halloween. There was a cafe that had just opened a little while before, called the Strand, right near Sister's place, which is where our headquarters is. And there were a couple people, black people from the local community board sitting in there, and some black children came in with their parents to ask for trick or treat. And the guy behind the counter said, "No, we don't have any." Some white kids came in with their white parents, and he pulled it out and gave it to them. Now this is right in front of the two community board members. And when word got out, we organized with other people. Not in 2018, not in our community. You're going to have just blatant racism around white kids can get trick or treat, black kids can't. Not even get to whether trick or treat, but how do you even think about doing that? And then he raised, well, the person who's working there didn't know, and the people who own it are brown skin. I mean, just a whole bunch of fluff around. It doesn't matter who's carrying out a racist policy, it's got to be addressed. And
why do you force me to this level of confrontation over this candy crap? I mean, why do you have me with all the stuff that I should be concentrating on? There's just like no respite with you guys.
And so we boycotted the place, and they're out of business. They have not reopened since then. And it's a lesson not only to them but to the other merchants in the area who said, "Oh, in terms of what kind of treatment are we going to get? Are we going to get away with? And what are the consequences if we mistreat the indigenous population of Brooklyn, the black community in Brooklyn?" And so that's one of the things that we've been dealing with. Is you got to have a connection between what you're doing in terms of theory and ideas in the streets to make it real for people and to understand the power of what we can do organized.
Excellent.
And so that we're struggling to get a black business in that spot, so they don't just put somebody else in there. So we're trying to do a lot of different things in pushing the question of our own control and self-determination in the areas that we live in.
And that is exactly what Pan-Africanism and the Black Power movement is about. And I think that's going over a lot of people's heads, because there's a couple of things that are required for any change to take place on any level, even the smallest change. First of all, you have to have a vision, a goal. You have to know what it is you want to accomplish, and you have to have a game plan. It is not just get mad, cuss people out, and then when you run out of breath, go home and watch TV. You have to have a game plan, a focused game plan, and you have to know what it is you want to accomplish. And if you don't have those two things, you're just in the way.
Yep,
You're just
yep,
in the way.
Yep, yep. And we're doing there's another spot down the street, which they're building a condo, and we said, you know what, we're gonna fight them just putting whoever they want in those condos. And we've been out there demonstrating, and we found that doing research around, do they have C of Os for what they're getting ready to do, just to find out who the owners are. We found out this Israeli group, and they want to flip it. And just let them know, you're not going to be able to conduct business as usual without a fight.
Right.
That this is the tip of an iceberg of what it is we can do, and that we want people in there, black people, who can afford to live in. I mean, that the cost be affordable to working class black people, not folks who are earning $150,000 to $200,000.
That is correct. That is correct. That is correct. That is correct. And those people and those people who are earning less within those parameters, there's a hell of a lot of people who are genius level who do not get opportunity to move up the scale and bring people along with them.
Right.
Not only are we being bombarded, and I only got a minute left, so I got to do this quick, but not only are we being bombarded with ethnic cleansing, but we are being held in abeyance by a lack of opportunity.
That's part of the
when they
ethnic
give
cleansing,
us any opportunity, they make sure that we don't have the tools required to compete.
Maximize it.
Right. Compete and succeed against an adversary that is has all the money in the world, prep for success, and has all the systemic rules and regulations going in their favor in the first place.
Right, they're 80 yards ahead before we start of a 100-yard race.
Right, I don't need a white school. I just need the junk y'all got. Y'all, you can go play with yourself. Just give me the good junk. You take it out. We got a minute left.
We have a minute left. Tomorrow, All Souls Episcopal Church, 114th and St. Nicholas Avenue for Malcolm X commemoration program. Saturday, March 3rd in Brooklyn at Bed-Stuy Restoration. We Ain't Going Nowhere Tribunal, 1 p.m., 1360 Fulton Street. We can be reached at 718-398-1766. That's 718-398-1766, or on Facebook and Twitter at Ain't Going Nowhere -Tribunal.
Roger Wareham of the December 12th movement, I want to thank you for being here. I roped this brother in. He was only supposed to visit, and I made him I made him take a
We were
rent.
winging it.
But God is in charge, and he wanted this brother to close that 30. That's right. Cap off. That's
and
right.
I hope people come join us. We move forward together.
Excellent, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is 30 Frames a Second, and I've had the pleasure of once again having people on this show that know what they're talking about. And we'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in, and well, peace. We out. My brother. Thank you.
Yo soy una africana musulmana orgullosa. Je suis fière d'être africaine musulmane. I am a proud African Muslim, and Trump really hurt my feelings when he said those mean things about the African continent. Shame on you, number 45.